The thick-rimmed glasses shattered against the gymnasium wall with a sound like breaking dreams. Fragments of prescription lenses scattering across the polished hardwood floor like fallen stars. 16-year-old Maya Chen stood frozen in the doorway, her world suddenly blurred into an impressionist painting of shapes and shadows. Behind her, 3 voices erupted in cruel laughter that echoed off the empty bleachers. But what those bullies didn't know was that Maya had been studying TAEKWONDO for 12 years under her grandmother's watchful eye in their family's dojo. They also didn't know that the security system they thought was offline had just recorded everything in perfect high definition. And in exactly 43 seconds, Roosevelt High would witness the most spectacular display of martial arts justice ever captured on camera. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning fog rolled in from San Francisco Bay like a gray blanket, wrapping around the red brick buildings of Roosevelt High School in Oakland, California. Maya Chen adjusted her glasses nervously as she navigated the crowded hallway, her worn messenger bag bouncing against her hip with each careful step. The thick frames had been her constant companion since 4th grade, when her myopia had worsened to the point where she couldn't see the whiteboard from the front row. They weren't fashionable, those glasses, thick black plastic with a slight crack near the left temple that her mother kept promising to get fixed but never quite found the time or money for. Maya was the kind of student who moved through high school like a ghost, visible but rarely noticed. At 5'2" with straight black hair that she kept in a practical ponytail, she had mastered the art of blending into crowds. Her uniform of dark jeans, oversized hoodies, and beat-up sneakers helped her disappear into the background, which was exactly how she preferred it. Roosevelt High had a population of nearly 3,000 students, and Maya was content to be just another face in the yearbook, another name on the honor roll that nobody paid attention to. What her classmates didn't know was that every day after school, while they were at sports practice or hanging out at the mall, Maya walked 6 blocks to Chen's family Taekwondo Academy, a narrow storefront wedged between a Vietnamese restaurant and a hardware store. The faded sign outside bore her grandmother's name in both English and Korean characters, though most people in the neighborhood simply called it Grandma Chen's place. Inside those modest walls, Maya transformed from invisible high school student into something entirely different. Her grandmother, Master Chen Sun-ya, had immigrated to California in 1975 with nothing but her expertise in Taekwondo and an unshakable belief that discipline could overcome any obstacle. She had opened the dojo in 1982, teaching neighborhood kids the ancient art while Maya's mother worked double shifts at the hospital to keep their small family afloat. When Maya turned 4, her grandmother had begun teaching her the basic forms, not as a hobby or after-school activity, but as a way of life. Taekwondo is not about fighting, Grandma Chen would say in her careful English, her weathered hands guiding Maya's stance. It is about balance, mind, body, spirit. When these 3 are in harmony, you become unstoppable. But strength without wisdom is just violence, and wisdom without strength is just talking. For 12 years, Maya had absorbed these lessons, along with the precise kicks, blocks, and strikes that made Taekwondo one of the most formidable martial arts in the world. She had earned her black belt at 14, but more importantly, she had learned control. The ability to break wooden boards with her bare hands came secondary to understanding when not to use that power. Her grandmother had been very clear about that. In America, people will underestimate you, Grandma Chen had explained during one of their evening training sessions. They see young Asian girl with glasses, they think weak, quiet, easy target. This can be advantage if you are smart. Let them think what they want to think. But remember, when someone threatens your safety or dignity, you have right to defend yourself. Just make sure you can live with consequences. Maya had nodded solemnly, not fully understanding at the time what her grandmother meant. She lived in a relatively safe neighborhood, attended a decent school, and kept to herself. The idea of actually needing to use her martial arts skills outside the dojo seemed as remote as needing to perform surgery or pilot an airplane. Roosevelt High School had always been a place where social hierarchies were strictly maintained through an invisible but powerful system of status markers. At the top were the athletes, particularly the football and basketball players, followed by the cheerleaders and student government kids. Below them were the various clubs and activity groups, then the general student population. And finally, at the bottom, were the kids who didn't fit into any particular category. Maya had always assumed she belonged in that final group, neither bullied nor befriended, simply overlooked. The trouble began on a Tuesday in late October, during what should have been an ordinary lunch period. Maya typically spent her lunch breaks in the library working on homework or reading, but that day the library was closed for maintenance. Instead, she found herself in the courtyard, sitting alone at a concrete table with her sandwich and a book about Korean history that she was reading for her own curiosity rather than any class assignment. She was absorbed in a chapter about the Japanese occupation when a shadow fell across her page. Looking up through her thick glasses, she saw 3 figures blocking the afternoon sun. Even with her poor vision, she recognized them immediately. Jake Morrison, Trevor Walsh, and Danny Kim. They were seniors, all members of the wrestling team, and they had the kind of casual confidence that came from being 17 years old and physically imposing. Jake Morrison was their unofficial leader, a stocky kid with prematurely receding hair and the kind of aggressive swagger that some people mistook for charisma. His father owned several car dealerships around the Bay Area, which gave Jake access to expensive clothes and the latest iPhone, both of which he wore like armor against any suggestion that he might be ordinary. Trevor Walsh was taller and leaner, with dirty blonde hair and the perpetual squint of someone who spent too much time staring at screens. His family had money too, though he tried to hide it behind carefully curated thrift store finds and an affected disinterest in material things. Danny Kim was the most complicated of the 3. He was Korean American like Maya, but that's where the similarities ended. Where Maya was quiet and studious, Danny was loud and athletic. Where she embraced her heritage through language lessons and cultural traditions, he seemed determined to distance himself from anything that might mark him as different. His parents were both doctors, and they had raised him in the affluent hills of Oakland, far from the working-class neighborhood where Maya lived with her mother and grandmother. "Hey, Four Eyes," Jake said, his voice carrying that particular tone of manufactured friendliness that Maya had learned to recognize as dangerous. "What are you reading?" "Let me guess, something really exciting like calculus or SAT prep." Maya looked up cautiously, her hand instinctively moving to adjust her glasses. "Just a history book," she said quietly, hoping they would lose interest and move on. "History," Trevor repeated, drawing out the word like it was inherently funny. "What kind of history? Like American history? Or," he paused for effect, "foreign history?" The emphasis on the word foreign was subtle but preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Democratic South Korea. And my family came here from South Korea in the 1970s. "Same difference," Trevor said with a dismissive wave. "All looks the same to me." That's when Maya made her first mistake. Instead of walking away, instead of de-escalating the situation as her grandmother had taught her, she let her anger show. "Maybe if you paid attention in world geography instead of sleeping through class, you'd know the difference," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. The change in atmosphere was immediate and dangerous. Jake's fake friendly expression dropped entirely, replaced by something much more honest and much more threatening. Trevor stepped closer, and Danny's face flushed with embarrassment and rage. "What did you just say?" Jake asked quietly. Maya realized she had crossed a line, but it was too late to take it back. "I said maybe you should learn basic geography before making ignorant comments about other countries." "Ignorant?" Trevor laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's rich, coming from someone who probably doesn't even speak English at home." "I was born in Oakland," Maya said, standing up from the table. "I speak perfect English, and I'm getting better grades than all three of you combined." It was true, and they all knew it. Maya was ranked 7th in their class of 847 students, had perfect attendance, and had never received anything lower than an A- on any assignment. Her academic achievements were posted on the honor roll every semester, a constant reminder. To students like Jake, Trevor, and Danny, that success could come from unexpected places. "Grades don't mean shit in the real world," Danny said, his voice rising. "You think you're so smart with your books and your perfect test scores, but you're just a weird little nerd who doesn't have any friends." Maya felt the words hit her, like physical blows, partly because they contained enough truth to sting. She was a loner by choice, but that didn't make it hurt less to have her isolation pointed out so cruelly. "At least I don't have to bully people to feel important," she said, gathering her books and preparing to leave. That's when Jake stepped directly in front of her, blocking her path. He was nearly a foot taller than Maya and probably outweighed her by 60 pounds. Up close, she could smell his cologne, an expensive scent that couldn't quite mask the underlying odor of aggression and entitlement. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked. "We're not done talking to you." Maya felt her heart rate increase, but not from fear. 12 years of training had taught her to recognize the physiological signs of approaching conflict. Elevated pulse, heightened awareness, the subtle shift in muscle tension that preceded action. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "When escape is not possible, make yourself ready. But always try to escape first." "I need to get to class," Maya said, trying to step around him. Jake moved to block her again, and this time Trevor joined him, forming a semicircle around the concrete table. Other students in the courtyard were beginning to notice the confrontation, but instead of intervening, they seemed to sense drama and moved closer to watch. "Class doesn't start for 15 minutes, Danny said, checking his phone. "You've got plenty of time to chat with us." Maya looked around, calculating her options. The courtyard was large and open, with multiple exits. But all three boys were between her and the nearest door leading back into the school building. Behind her was a low concrete wall that bordered the parking lot. She could probably vault over it, but that would mean turning her back on them, which every instinct told her was a bad idea. "What do you want?" she asked, keeping her voice as calm as possible. "Want?" Jake seemed to consider the question. "I want you to apologize for calling us ignorant. I want you to admit that you think you're better than everyone else because you get good grades. And I want you to promise to keep your mouth shut from now on when your betters are talking." The word betters hung in the air like a challenge. Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach as she realized this wasn't just casual bullying or teenage stupidity. This was something more systematic, more dangerous. These boys genuinely believed they were superior to her, not because of any achievement or character trait, but simply because of who they were and where they came from. "I'm not going to apologize for defending myself," Maya said quietly. "And I'm definitely not going to promise to stay quiet when people say ignorant things about my heritage." Trevor laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Your heritage? You mean being a stereotypical Asian nerd who thinks she's smarter than everyone else?" "I mean being Korean American and proud of both parts of that identity," Maya replied, her voice growing stronger. "Something you might understand if you weren't so busy trying to fit in with people who probably make fun of your heritage when you're not around." She was looking directly at Danny when she said this, and she saw him flinch. For a moment, she thought she might have gotten through to him. reminded him that they were both Asian American students navigating the complicated social dynamics of Roosevelt High. But instead of solidarity, her words seemed to trigger something ugly in him. "Don't you dare," Danny said, stepping closer. "Don't you dare try to make this about race. This is about you being a stuck-up bitch who thinks she's better than everyone else." The profanity felt like an escalation, a sign that whatever thin veneer of civilized behavior had been restraining them was starting to crack. Maya could see other students pulling out their phones, some probably hoping to capture whatever was about to happen for social media posterity. "I think I'm better than people who bully others for reading books," Maya said, her own anger beginning to override her caution. "I think I'm better than people who make racist comments and then get mad when they're called out on it. And I definitely think I'm better than people who gang up on someone because they can't handle being corrected." The silence that followed was pregnant with tension. Maya could see the calculation happening in Jake's eyes, the moment when he decided that words were no longer sufficient for whatever lesson he thought she needed to learn. "You know what your problem is? You don't know your place. You think because you get good grades and your teachers like you, that makes you special. But look around. Nobody here gives a shit about your test scores. Nobody wants to be your friend. You're just a weird little nerd who needs to learn some respect." Maya felt the familiar calm that always preceded action, the mental clarity that came when her mind and body prepared for conflict. Her grandmother had taught her that anger was natural, but rage was dangerous. The trick was to channel the energy without losing control. "Respect is earned," Maya said quietly, "and bullying people doesn't earn respect. It just proves you're insecure." That's when Jake reached for her glasses. It happened fast, but Maya's trained reflexes made it seem like slow motion. Jake's hand moved toward her face, fingers extended to grab the thick frames that had become such a target for his mockery. In that split second, Maya had to make a choice: let him take her glasses and hope the humiliation would satisfy him, or stop him and risk escalating the situation into something much more serious. Her grandmother's voice whispered in her mind, "When someone attacks your dignity, you have the right to defend yourself." Maya's hand shot up, intercepting Jake's wrist before his fingers could reach her glasses. Her grip was precise and firm, applying pressure to the nerve point she had practiced thousands of times in the dojo. Jake's eyes widened in surprise and pain. "Don't touch me," Maya said, her voice deadly calm. For a moment, they were frozen in that position, Jake's hand trapped in Maya's grip, Trevor and Danny staring in shock at this unexpected display of resistance. The gathered crowd of students suddenly realizing they were watching something more serious than typical high school drama. Jake tried to pull his hand free, but Maya's grip was like iron. 12 years of conditioning had given her fingers the strength to crack walnuts and the precision to find pressure points that could disable an opponent without causing permanent damage. "Let go of me, you crazy bitch," Jake hissed, his face reddening with effort and embarrassment. "Apologize," Maya said simply. "What?" "Apologize for the racist comments. Apologize for trying to touch me without permission. And walk away." Jake's face cycled through several expressions: surprise, anger, calculation, and finally rage. The idea that this small, quiet girl was making demands of him in front of an audience was clearly more than his ego could tolerate. "You're out of your fucking mind," he said, and used his free hand to swing at her face. Maya released his trapped wrist and ducked under the wild punch, her movement so fluid and practiced that Jake's fist whistled harmlessly over her head. Off balance from the missed swing, Jake stumbled forward, giving Maya the opportunity she needed to step back and reassess the situation. But Trevor and Danny were already moving, closing in from both sides like pack animals who had finally decided to abandon any pretense of civilization. Maya realized with crystal clarity that this was no longer about words or hurt feelings. This was about 3 larger, stronger opponents who had decided to teach her a lesson through violence. Her grandmother's training took over completely. Multiple attackers require speed and precision, Master Chen had taught her. You cannot fight 3 people the same way you fight one. You must create distance, eliminate threats quickly, and never allow yourself to be surrounded. Trevor reached her first, grabbing for her shoulder with one hand while drawing back. His other fist. Maya pivoted on her left foot, letting his momentum carry him past her while she grabbed his extended arm and used a basic hip throw to send him sprawling across the concrete table where she had been sitting just minutes before. Her history book went flying, pages fluttering like wounded birds. Danny was smarter, hanging back and trying to circle around to her blind side. But Maya had no blind side, not after 12 years of training that emphasized awareness and positioning. Above all else, she tracked his movement while keeping Jake in her peripheral vision, calculating angles and distances the way other students calculated math problems. "You are so dead," Jake snarled, charging at her like an angry bull. Maya waited until the last possible second, then sidestepped and extended her leg in a perfect sweep that caught Jake's ankles and sent him crashing to the ground in a tangle of limbs and wounded pride. The crowd of watching students gasped collectively, phones recording every moment of what was quickly becoming the most dramatic confrontation in Roosevelt High's recent history. But Maya's moment of triumph was short-lived. As Jake fell, his flailing hand caught the strap of her messenger bag, yanking it off her shoulder and sending the contents spilling across the courtyard. Books, papers, pens, and her calculator scattered like debris from an explosion. And in the chaos, Danny finally made his move. He came in low and fast, tackling Maya around the waist and driving her backward toward the concrete wall. Maya managed to break her fall with a practiced breakfall technique, rolling to absorb the impact, but Danny was on top of her immediately, his weight advantage finally coming into play. "Hold her down," Jake shouted, scrambling to his feet with murder in his eyes. Trevor, recovering from his encounter with the concrete table, moved to grab Maya's arms while Danny tried to pin her legs. For a terrifying moment, Maya found herself trapped under their combined weight, her carefully maintained distance collapsed into a grappling match where size and strength mattered more than technique. But her grandmother had prepared her for this too. "If they take you to the ground," Master Chen had said, "you must create space immediately. Use your legs, your elbows, anything that can strike. And remember, when you are desperate, you fight." "Dirty." Maya drove her elbow back into Danny's ribs, feeling him grunt and loosen his grip. At the same time, she brought her knee up sharply, catching Trevor in the stomach and doubling him over. With both attackers momentarily stunned, she managed to roll free and regain her footing. But she had lost something in the struggle. Her glasses, knocked askew during the grappling, hung crooked on her face, one lens cracked and the other completely missing. The world had become a blur of shapes and colors, making it difficult to track her opponent's movements. Jake, meanwhile, had found his footing and his rage. "You want to fight?" he screamed. "Let's fucking fight." He charged again. But this time he was smarter about it, staying low and driving forward with his shoulder aimed at Maya's midsection. Maya tried to sidestep, but without her glasses, her depth perception was compromised. Jake's shoulder caught her in the ribs, driving the air from her lungs and sending her staggering backward. "Get her glasses," Trevor shouted, apparently realizing that Maya's vision was now her weakness. "She's blind without them." Danny, still clutching his ribs but determined to redeem himself, lunged for the crooked frames hanging from Maya's face. His fingers caught the plastic temple, and for a moment they struggled over the glasses like children fighting over a toy. Then the temple snapped. Maya felt the glasses tear away from her face, the broken temple piece cutting a thin line across her cheek as Danny yanked them free. Without the corrective lenses, the world dissolved into an impressionist painting, all soft edges and indistinct. Colors. There, Danny said, holding up the broken glasses like a trophy. Let's see how smart you are now, blind girl. Maya stood in the center of the courtyard. Surrounded by 3 opponents she could barely see, her glasses broken in Danny's triumphant fist. The crowd of students had grown larger, drawn by the noise and the promise of violence. She could hear their voices. This is not entertainment, and anyone I catch posting videos of this incident will be facing serious consequences. The phones disappeared with remarkable speed, though Maya suspected that plenty of footage had already been captured and shared. In the age of social media, news traveled faster than administrative damage control. Jake and Trevor need to go to the nurse, Mrs. Rodriguez continued, gesturing to the 2 boys who were slowly trying to sit up. Danny, you're coming with me to the principal's office. And Maya. She paused, clearly trying to process what she had witnessed. Maya, I think you should call your family. As if summoned by the suggestion, Maya's phone buzzed in her pocket. With her damaged vision, she couldn't see the caller ID, but she recognized her mother's ringtone. Mom, she answered, her voice still shaky. Maya, honey, are you okay? I just got a call from the school saying there was some kind of incident. Maya looked around at the aftermath of the confrontation. Jake Morrison sitting against the wall with blood on his face. Trevor Walsh being helped to his feet by concerned classmates. Danny Kim standing apart from everyone with the look of someone who was realizing that his life had just taken a very different turn. And dozens of students who would be talking about this moment for months to come. I'm okay, Mom, she said finally. But I think you need to come pick me up. I'll be there in 10 minutes, her mother said without hesitation. Don't talk to anyone about what happened until I get there. As Maya waited for her mother to arrive, sitting on a bench outside the principal's office with Mrs. Rodriguez keeping watch over her, she found herself thinking about her grandmother's words about balance and harmony. The fight had lasted less than 3 minutes, but she knew it would have consequences that would ripple through Roosevelt High for weeks or months to come. She had defended herself successfully, but at what cost? Jake Morrison would probably need stitches for the cut on his forehead. Trevor Walsh might have cracked ribs from his encounter with the concrete table. And Danny Kim, who had started the day as a popular wrestler with college prospects, would now be known as one of the boys who got beaten up by a girl with broken glasses. Maya touched the cut on her cheek gingerly, wincing at the I count at least 47 seconds of verbal harassment with clear racial undertones before any physical contact occurred. When Mr. Morrison reaches for Miss Chun's face, her defensive response appears to be both reasonable and measured. Vice Principal Thompson leaned forward, his expression grave. Be that as it may, Maya's actions resulted in serious injuries to 3 students. Jake Morrison required 12 stitches for his head wound. Trevor Walsh has 2 cracked ribs. We can't ignore the severity of the physical outcomes. And we can't ignore the severity of the racist harassment that preceded those outcomes, Attorney Park replied smoothly. Or the fact that this appears to be part of a pattern of behavior that the school has failed to address. I've spoken to 6 other Asian American students who report similar incidents involving these same 3 boys over the past 2 years. Maya's mother reached over and squeezed her hand gently. Dr. Chun worked as an emergency room physician at Oakland General Hospital, which meant she had seen her share of violence and its aftermath. But Maya could tell from the tightness around her mother's eyes that this was different. This was personal. Maya hasn't been in trouble once in her 3 years here, Dr. Chun said firmly. She maintains a 397 GPA, volunteers at the community center, and has never had so much as a detention. Meanwhile, Jake Morrison has been suspended twice for fighting. Trevor Walsh was caught cheating on his SATs, and Danny Kim was arrested last year for underage drinking. Which students represent the real problem at this school? The statistics hung in the air like an indictment. Maya had known that Jake, Trevor, and Danny weren't model students, But hearing their disciplinary records laid out so starkly made her realize how much the school's tolerance for their behavior had enabled. Yesterday's confrontation. Principal Harrison cleared his throat. "I understand your frustration, Dr. Chen, but we have to consider all aspects of this situation." Maya's response, while perhaps legally justified, was disproportionate to the threat she faced. She has extensive martial arts training, which means she had an advantage that other students wouldn't possess. Are you seriously suggesting that my daughter should have allowed herself to be assaulted because she's capable of defending herself effectively? Dr. Chun's voice rose slightly, her professional composure cracking. Should she have pretended to be helpless to make her attackers feel better about themselves? Attorney Park placed a calming hand on Dr. Chen's arm. "Principal Harrison, are you familiar with California Education Code, Section 48915? It specifically protects students who use reasonable force in self-defense, regardless of their training or physical capabilities. The law doesn't require victims to match their response to their attacker's abilities. It requires the response to be reasonable given the circumstances." Maya listened to the legal arguments swirling around her and felt a strange sense of disconnection, as if she were watching a movie about someone else's life. The rational part of her mind understood that this was important, that decisions made in this room would affect her future. "Maya should chair that committee," Dr. Chun said firmly. "She's demonstrated more leadership in one afternoon than most adults show in their entire careers." Maya spoke for the first time since the meeting began. "I don't want to be famous for this," she said quietly. "I just want to finish high school and go to college. I want things to go back to normal." The adults around her exchanged meaningful looks, the kind of glances that pass between people who understand something that the young person in the room doesn't quite grasp yet. "Maya," Attorney Park said gently, "I don't think normal is an option anymore. You've become a symbol, whether you intended to or not. The question is how you choose to use that platform." Over the next 3 weeks, Maya discovered what Attorney Park meant. The video of her confrontation with Jake, Trevor, and Danny had been viewed over 2 million times across various social media platforms. Local news stations had picked up the story, framing it as everything from Asian American student fights back against racism to teen martial artist hospitalizes classmates in school brawl. Maya's new glasses, paid for by the school district as part of their settlement agreement, felt strange on her face. They were virtually identical to her old pair, but everything looked slightly different through the new lenses, as if the world had shifted a few degrees while she wasn't paying attention. The hallways of Roosevelt High had definitely shifted. Students who had never acknowledged her existence now smiled and waved when they saw her. Teachers who had barely noticed her raised hand in class now sought her opinions on everything from homework policies to cafeteria food. The invisibility that had once been her armor was gone, replaced by a hypervisibility that made her feel constantly exposed. Maya, wait up!" She turned to see Jennifer Walsh jogging to catch up with her between classes. Jennifer was a junior, Trevor's younger sister, and someone Maya had never spoken to directly despite sharing 3 classes over the past 2 years. "I wanted to talk to you," Jennifer said, slightly out of breath, "about what happened with Trevor and those guys." Maya tensed, unsure whether this conversation would be friendly or hostile. Trevor Walsh was still recovering from his cracked ribs, and family loyalty could be unpredictable. "I wanted to thank you," Jennifer continued, surprising Maya completely. "Trevor's been a bully his whole life, and my parents have always made excuses for him. They said boys will be boys, or that he was just being competitive, or that other kids were too sensitive." They stood in the hallway as students flowed around them, creating a small island of conversation in the current of teenage movement. "After what happened to you, 3 more girls came forward with stories about Trevor harassing them," Jennifer said. "One of them was my best friend Katie, and she never told me because she was afraid I wouldn't believe her. She was afraid I'd Choose my brother over her. Maya didn't know what to say. She had hoped that her confrontation with the three boys would end with their discipline and her return to anonymity. She hadn't expected it to unlock a flood of similar stories from other students. "I'm sorry that happened to your friend," Maya said finally, "and I'm sorry about Trevor getting hurt. I didn't want anyone to get seriously injured." Jennifer shook her head. "Don't apologize for defending yourself. Trevor got hurt because he made a choice to attack someone, and he found out that actions have consequences. Maybe if he'd learned that lesson earlier, he wouldn't have hurt so many other people." The conversation stayed with Maya throughout the day, adding another layer to her complicated feelings about what had become known around school as the incident. She had acted in self-defense, but the ripple effects kept expanding in ways she couldn't have predicted. At lunch, she sat with a group of students she was still getting used to. Marcus Rivera from her AP Physics class, Sarah Kim from Korean Language Club, and 3 girls from various grades who had approached her over the past week to share their own experiences with harassment and bullying. It was a diverse group united by the common experience of feeling marginalized or targeted. At Roosevelt High, "Did you see the news this morning?" Marcus asked, pulling out his phone. Assemblywoman Martinez introduced a bill called the Student Self-Defense Protection Act. They're calling it Maya's Law. Maya nearly choked on her sandwich. "They're calling it what?" "Maya's Law," Sarah repeated, grinning. "It would protect students who use martial arts or self-defense training to protect themselves from bullying, even if their response causes serious injury to their attackers." Maya stared at the phone screen as Marcus scrolled through the news article. Her name appeared multiple times, along with phrases like landmark case and precedent-setting incident. The idea that her desperate moment of self-preservation had influenced actual legislation felt surreal and overwhelming. "This is insane," Maya said quietly. "I just wanted them to leave me alone. And now maybe they'll leave other people alone too," said Amy Chen, a sophomore who had approached Maya the previous week to thank her for showing everyone that we don't have to be victims. The attention wasn't entirely positive. Maya had received several hostile messages on social media from people who thought her response had been excessive, that she was a dangerous person who should be expelled or arrested. Some comments had racial undertones similar to what Jake, Trevor, and Danny had expressed, suggesting that she was an outsider who didn't understand American values. But for every negative message, there were dozens of positive ones. Girls from other schools shared their own stories of harassment and thanked Maya for showing them that they could fight back. Parents wrote to express their admiration for her courage. Martial arts instructors from across the Bay Area offered free training to students who wanted to learn self-defense. Maya's grandmother had been surprisingly quiet about the entire situation. Master Chun had watched the news coverage with an unreadable expression, nodding occasionally but saying little. It wasn't until Maya stopped by the dojo, after school 3 weeks after the incident, that her grandmother finally shared her thoughts. "You have brought attention to our family in our dojo," Master Chen said as they went through their usual warm-up routine. "Some people think this is good attention. Some think it is bad attention. What do you think?" Maya considered the question as she stretched, feeling the familiar comfort of the dojo's disciplined environment. "I think it's complicated attention," she said finally. "I didn't want to be famous, but maybe some good things are happening because of it." Her grandmother nodded slowly. "Fame is like fire. It can warm you or burn you, depending on how you handle it. The question is, will you let this fire consume you, or will you use it to light the way for others?" They worked through their training routine in comfortable silence, Maya's body automatically executing the forms and techniques that had become second nature over 12 years of practice. But even in the familiar movements, she could feel how the recent events had changed her. Her strikes were more confident, her stances more grounded. She had tested her training in the real world and emerged victorious. "Your technique has improved," Master Chen observed as they finished their session. "Not because you have learned new moves, but because you now know that what we practice here has real power. You have faced your fear and found your strength." Maya bowed respectfully to her grandmother, following the traditional forms that connected her to centuries of martial arts wisdom. "I still feel scared sometimes," she admitted. "All the attention, the interviews people want to do, the way everyone looks at me now. I don't know if I'm strong enough to handle it." Master Chen smiled, her weathered face creasing with affection. "And pride. Strength is not about never feeling fear, Maya. Strength is about feeling fear and choosing to do what is right anyway. You have already proven you have this strength." As Maya walked home from the dojo that evening, she reflected on how much her life had changed in 3 weeks. The girl who had sat alone in the courtyard reading about Korean history seemed like a different person. Someone from a time when her biggest concern was maintaining her grades and staying invisible. Now she was fielding interview requests from national news outlets, considering speaking opportunities at anti-bullying conferences, and serving as the student representative on Roosevelt High's new harassment prevention task force. Her college applications, which she had planned to submit quietly with hope for academic scholarships, were now being reviewed by admissions officers who had seen her story on the news. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Stanford called. They want to schedule an interview. Are you interested?" Maya stopped walking and stared at the message. Stanford University, which had been her dream school but seemed financially and academically out of reach just a month ago, was now actively recruiting her. Not just for her grades or test scores, but because her story had resonated with people across the country who saw her as a symbol of courage and resilience. She typed back, "Yes, I'm interested." But even as she confirmed her interest in the interview, Maya found herself thinking about the broader implications of her newfound visibility. She had become a symbol, but symbols could be limiting as well as empowering. People had expectations for how she should behave, what causes she should support, how she should use her platform. The next morning brought a new challenge. Maya arrived at school to find protesters gathered outside the main entrance, holding signs with slogans like "Violence is never the answer" and "Expel dangerous students." They were small in number, maybe 15 people, but their presence attracted local news crews and created a circus atmosphere that made Maya's stomach twist with anxiety. Principal Harrison met her at a side entrance, guiding her through corridors she had never seen before to avoid the crowds and cameras. "I'm sorry about this," he said as they walked. "We're working with the police to ensure your safety, but some people have strong feelings about what happened." Maya nodded, understanding that this was part of the price of becoming a public figure. She had defended herself successfully, but that success had made her a target for people who disagreed with her choices or disapproved of the attention she was receiving. In her first period, a P-history class, Mrs. Rodriguez addressed the situation directly. "I know there's a lot of noise outside today, and I know some of you are feeling anxious about it. But I want you to remember that what we saw 3 weeks ago was a young woman defending herself against an unprovoked attack. That's not controversial. That's human rights." Maya felt a surge of gratitude for her teacher's support, but also a deepening awareness of how her personal situation had become a battleground for larger cultural and political debates about self-defense, racial harassment, and the rights of students. The protesters were gone by lunch, but their message had been received. Maya understood that her story had touched on sensitive issues that divided people, and that her visibility made her a target for both support and criticism. That afternoon, she received an unexpected visitor. Danny Kim appeared at her locker as she was gathering books for her final classes, looking nervous and significantly thinner than she remembered. His face bore the pallor of someone who hadn't been sleeping well, and his usual confident swagger had been replaced by hesitant uncertainty. "Maya," he said quietly, "can I talk to you for a minute?" Maya tensed, unsure whether this conversation would be friendly or hostile. Danny had been suspended along with Jake and Trevor, but unlike his friends, he had returned to school the previous week and had been keeping a very low profile. "What do you want?" she asked, not moving away from her locker, but ready to defend herself if necessary. Danny looked around nervously, as if checking to make sure they weren't being overheard or recorded. "I wanted to apologize," he said finally, "for what we did to you, for the things we said. It was wrong, and I'm sorry." Maya studied his face, looking for signs of sincerity or manipulation. Danny had always been the most conflicted of the three boys, the one who seemed to understand that their behavior was wrong, even as he participated in it. "Why now?" she asked. "Why didn't you apologize 3 weeks ago?" Danny's shoulders sagged. "Because I was scared and stupid and trying to protect my reputation. Because I thought if I just laid low, everyone would forget about it, and I could go back to my normal life." He gestured toward the hallway, where other students were pointedly avoiding looking in their direction. "But that's not happening, is it? Everyone knows what we did, and they should know. We were bullies, and we got what we deserved." Maya felt a strange mix of emotions as she listened to Danny's words. Part of her was angry that it had taken 3 weeks and massive public pressure for him to acknowledge what she had known immediately, that but apologizing to me isn't enough. You need to apologize to all the other girls you and your friends harassed over the years. Danny nodded miserably. "I know, I'm working on that. And I'm seeing a counselor to try to understand why I thought that behavior was okay." They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Two teenagers whose lives had been permanently altered by a 3-minute confrontation that neither of them could take back. "For what it's worth," Danny said as he turned to leave, "I'm glad you fought back. Not because we got hurt, but because it finally made me realize what we were doing to people. Maybe if someone had stood up to us earlier, we would have learned to be better people sooner." Maya watched him walk away, his shoulders bent with the weight of consequences and genuine remorse. She realized that her decision to fight back had changed not just her own life, but the lives of everyone involved in ways that were still unfolding. 2 months later, Maya stood on the stage of the Oakland Convention Center, looking out at an audience of nearly 3,000 people who had gathered for the Bay Area Anti-Bullying Conference. She wore her new glasses and a simple blue dress, her speech notes trembling slightly in her hands despite weeks of preparation. "6 months ago, I was invisible," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium sound system. "I thought that was protection. I thought if I didn't make waves, if I didn't draw attention to myself, I would be safe." She paused, looking out at the faces in the audience, parents, teachers, students, administrators, and advocates who had come to hear her story and learn from her experience. "I learned that invisibility isn't protection, it's just another form of silence. And silence enables the people who want to hurt us." Maya spoke for 20 minutes about her experience, about the importance of self-defense training, about the need for schools to take harassment seriously, and about the power of speaking up even when it's terrifying to do so. But mostly she spoke about the unexpected strength that comes from refusing to be a victim. The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. Afterward, dozens of people approached her to share their own stories, to thank her for her courage, and to ask for advice about their own situations. Maya listened to each person, offering what support and guidance she could while marveling at the community that had grown around her experience. Her mother waited for her at the back of the auditorium, beaming with pride and holding a bouquet of flowers from Maya's grandmother. "How do you feel?" Dr. Chen asked as they walked toward the exit. Maya considered the question carefully. 6 months ago, she would have been terrified by the attention, overwhelmed by the responsibility, and desperate to return to her quiet anonymity. Now, she felt something different. "I feel like myself," she said finally. "Not the invisible version I used to be, and not the symbol other people want me to be. Just myself, but stronger." They drove home through the streets of Oakland as the sun set over San Francisco Bay, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded Maya of the flames her grandmother had spoken about, the fire of attention that could burn or illuminate, depending on how it was handled. Maya had chosen to let it illuminate, to use her unwanted fame to shine light on issues that had been hidden in shadows for too long. She had testified before the state legislature in support of Maya's law, which had passed unanimously and been signed by the governor. She had worked with school districts across California to develop better anti-harassment protocols. She had partnered with martial arts schools to offer free self-defense classes to students who felt vulnerable or targeted. But perhaps most importantly, she had shown thousands of young people that they didn't have to accept being victims, that they had the right to defend themselves, and that standing up to bullies, even when it was scary, even when it had consequences, was not just acceptable but necessary. As they pulled into their driveway, Maya's phone buzzed with a message from Sarah Kim. "Did you see the news? Jake Morrison got rejected from USC. Trevor Walsh lost his wrestling scholarship. Danny Kim got into therapy and is doing volunteer work with anti-bullying organizations." Maya read the message with mixed feelings. She took no pleasure in Jake's and Trevor's setbacks, but she recognized that consequences were part of justice. Danny's path toward redemption gave her more hope, the possibility that people could change, that moments of crisis could become opportunities for growth. Her grandmother was waiting for her in the dojo, as Maya had known she would be. Master Chun had watched the speech online and wanted to hear Maya's reflections on the experience. "You spoke well today," her grandmother said as they began their evening training routine. "But more importantly, you spoke truthfully. Truth has power that pretty words cannot match." They worked through their forms in comfortable silence, Maya's body moving through the familiar patterns that had given her strength when she needed it most. The techniques were the same ones she had practiced for 12 years, but they felt different now, not just as methods of self-defense, but as expressions of confidence and self-respect. "What happens next?" Maya asked as they finished their session. Master Chun smiled, her expression holding the wisdom of someone who had seen many students grow from uncertain children into confident adults. "Next, you continue to grow. You go to college, you study hard, you help other people when you can. You remember that strength is not just about fighting. It is about choosing when to fight and when to show mercy." Maya bowed respectfully to her grandmother, understanding that this was both an ending and a beginning. The frightened girl who had been cornered in Roosevelt High's courtyard was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own power and wasn't afraid to use it responsibly. As she walked home that evening, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her from invisibility to advocacy, from victim to victor. She had broken 3 bullies' confidence and her own glasses, but in the process, she had found something much more valuable: the knowledge that she was capable of protecting herself and others, and the courage to use that knowledge when it mattered most. The girl who had once hidden behind thick glasses and oversized hoodies now walked with her head held high, ready to face whatever challenges college and adulthood might bring. She had learned that sometimes the most important battles are the ones you never wanted to fight, and that true strength comes not from avoiding conflict, but from standing up for what's right, even when the odds are against you. Maya's story had started with broken glasses and ended with broken barriers,